Today we discuss about unbalanced growth strategy, which is given by Hirschman. Last class we discussed about balanced growth strategy. At a time, the countries, undeveloped countries, has to invest different sectors at a time. But Hirschman criticized the balanced growth strategy, and he has given another development theory, which is unbalanced growth strategy. In this unbalanced growth strategy, he, according to Hirschman, instead of making all the sectors at a time, investing only one sector in the initial stage, that is refers to the unbalanced growth strategy. As balanced growth strategy, investment in all the sectors at a time. But instead of investing all the sectors at a time, we have to choose one sector in the initial stage. We have to invest in one sector that is related to unbalanced growth strategy. So they invest one sector at initial stage of their development process. Later on, that process, the pattern investing in the development strategy, we known as unbalanced growth strategy. So in this unbalanced growth strategy, which is given by Hirschman, he says that instead of investing all the sectors, undeveloped countries particularly, they invest in one sector that leads to create imbalances in the economy, that induces the investment in the economy, and that invest in different sectors and later period. So according to Hirschman's, the economy is divided into two main sectors. According to Hirschman, the economy is divided into two categories or two sectors. The two main sectors are DPA is one sector, SOC is another sector. DPA means direct product activities is one. SOC means social overhead capital is the second one. So what is direct product activities and what is social overhead capital? Here direct activities, product activities means the production which is related to the various industries, we call it as direct product activities. So the area in which the goods are produced directly, we call it as direct product activities sector. On the other hand, or another sector, social overhead capital. Social overhead capital. The social overhead capital, it is necessary for direct product activities. We named as social overhead capital. This social overhead capital, which includes or facilitate like transport, water facilities, electricity, communication, which all are comes under the social overhead capital. Transport, electricity, water, communication, which all are comes under the social overhead capital. So along with this, education, health are also called as social overhead infrastructure. So economic and social infrastructures are the basic for direct product activities. If we concentrate on social overhead capital, what does it mean? If we develop transport, water, electricity, communication, education and health, if we concentrate on this, that leads to increase the direct product activities also. That direct activities also develop. So investment path, how do we consider and what is the growth pattern or path? So according to uh, Hirschman, no need to invest in all the sectors at a time. We choose one sector and invest in that sector that creates imbalance in the economy and boost investment in the other sectors also. We have to choose one sector because why we are choosing one sector? Underdeveloped countries are no lack of capital formation. That is the reason why we have to choose one initial sector that also should be create imbalances, and here because that becomes balance the all the growth process. So that is the reason why if we invest on social overhead capital, it will attract the DPA, direct product activities. In this sense, when infrastructure like, as I said, transport, water, electricity, and communication facilities are created, it will act as, incentive to the industrial investment. When we develop the SOC, when we invest in SOC, that facilitate the other industries, or we can say that it is incentive for the uh, industrial investment. It means here the investment, particularly the both growth path has selected in SOC, investment or growth path. Otherwise, when we talk about the investment made on direct activities or direct product activities by establishing an industry, a particular region, which will, pressurize the investment in infrastructure facilities. Again, when we are establishing an investment on a particular industry in a particular region, that will not lead to, encourage the SOC activities, social overhead capital. Because again, if industry is established in a particular region, definitely they need, transport, they need water facilities, they need electricity, they need communication. In other words, as I said, if the initial investment in industries will create a demand for SOC. So of course, we have to select here DPA path. So earlier, in this case, no, it creating imbalance in the economy first and making balance in the next side. So here, either the way of growth achieved through the unbalanced growth strategy, ultimately we achieve the balanced growth strategy in the economy, particularly underdeveloped countries. So making investment in only one sector in an initial stage that creating imbalance in the economy, this is called as unbalanced growth strategy according to Hirschman. Hirschman also pointed out and focused on linkages, particularly backward linkages, forward linkages. Hirschman, when we talk about the backward linkages, the linkages of backward purchase to produce, the backward purchases to produce or to sell a commodity, particularly to called as backward linkages. For example, for iron industry, we need coal and iron. For example, for steel industry, know, iron industry, coal and iron mining, which are, backward linkages. For forward linkages, when we observe the linkages of selling a particular product for forward linkages. For example, for steel industry, selling of, finishing steel as a wholesale of business, retail business, and all construction activities are, considered as forward linkages. Here, both forward linkages as well as, backward linkages, a setup of pressure that led to a creation of new industry, which in turn create additional pressure so that, the pressure can be taken in the form of new profit opportunities for private entrepreneurship. So the pressure can be built through the, political process for a government to act. Here, the private investors, for example, might decide, build new factories for a given location without at the same time providing adequate housing facilities. If we provide the for inflow of workers or road supply of factories, transportation, their outputs. In such cases, here the government, the planners might be, force, particularly, product that builds, public households and the construction of the roads. For the, backward linkages, we have to measure the proportion of activity, particularly that output that is used in the input into the other industries. In other words, forward linkages occurs in industries producing goods that when become inputs to the other industries, and rather than when we observe the automobiles, particularly planners and might prefer to the sale in the setuping in the plant steel plant industries. In fact, when we observe, according to Hirschman's theory, the unbalanced growth strategies, the linkages related to linkages, industries are linkages to the other industries. In that way, in that case, when we are considering deciding on the development strategy. So according to Hirschman, within the DPA, direct productive activities, the most appropriate development strategy is to encourage the activities with the potentially strongest combined linkages. Investment should be concentrated on those sectors which are, input-output relationship linkages between the, linkages effect and foremost important. This is the reason why we provide a maximum investment in incentive to the activities to develop, and the balance becomes unbalanced growth argument that appears inconsistent for each other. So in there is no single pattern of industrial that all countries must be followed. So what are the merits when we observe what are the merits of unbalanced growth strategy? Whether it is, realistic theory compared to balanced growth theory. Because, the theory unbalanced growth is realistic. It suggests appropriate utilization of, scarce resources. Less developed countries can use, proper manner. This theory considers all aspects of growth planning and also more importance to basic infrastructures. This theory underlines the significance of basic industries in the process of growth. They consider the what are the basic industries and the investment. Automatically, the pressure for the growth consumer food industries. And also, large scale of production, economies of large scale production. When we observe this in a point of view, particularly related to the unbalanced growth strategies or argument, it generates the large scale production, establishing the industries which calls as establishment of generating all around the increased income and employment opportunities through the unbalanced growth strategy. Encouragement to the new investment or new inventions. We have to give incentives, particularly unbalanced growth that generates the pulls and the pressures in the system that is calling new inventions and new innovations. Self-reliance. When we talk about the self-reliance, that is under current and theory of unbalanced growth strategy, it starts with the realistic assumption of chronic scarcity of resources, particularly less developed countries or underdeveloped countries, and that contemplates to initiative accelerates the pressure of growth that accordance with the needs and means of the country concerned. Economic surplus also available will when we talk about the unbalanced growth strategy, the expected to generate in a greater supply or surplus in the system. This is because it emphasizes upon the capital good industries. This strategy also expected to produce particularly very strong supplier effect in the system that is stimulating the economy and employment opportunities when we observe. So here the another one is what are the critics for the unbalanced growth strategy, particularly which is given by Hirschman. So here when we talk about the strategy of unbalanced growth, it came into the for severe criticism. First, it has been pointed out that unbalanced growth strategy is based on wrong assumption that is only one factor constraining in economic growth. That statement itself it is wrong because how can we decide only one factor that is constraining economic growth or induces economic growth? That is scarcity of decision making ability with respect to the investment. There is a controversy. So this is one criticism of unbalanced growth strategy. The another one is the unbalanced growth strategy, which is also criticized around the inflationary pressures in the economy. The whether more investment is undertaken in social overhead capital or direct productive activities, the incomes of the people will rise that leads to increase the demand for the consumer goods, then especially food grains, it is sufficient if that is in a sufficient investment in agriculture and the other consumer goods that is not made, it will cause for the rising in the prices of the that particular products. So this is also one of the criticism of Hirschman's unbalanced growth strategy. And also, it has been pointed out that the responses from the private entrepreneurs, particularly the document, that pressure created by unbalancing growth strategy, because it is not adequate imbalance that creates in the economy without causing expansion that linkages sectors that resulting what will happen excess supply will be there or excess capacity in the some industries or some sectors. So that excess capacity represents wasting of the resources, particularly when we follow the unbalanced growth strategy. These are the criticisms of the Hirschman's unbalanced growth strategy. When we observe the another important theory, economic development theory, that is Schumpeter's theory of economic development. Schumpeter's theory of economic development. Here, Joseph Joseph A. Schumpeter presented his theory on economic growth in his famous book Theory of Economic Development. In his theory based on innovations, the stationary state equilibrium as an economy that gets momentum with innovations. With innovations, right? So here the another important theory, which is Schumpeter's theory of economic development. This theory, based on certain assumptions, this theory following the entrepreneur has to follow certain rules. He introduced that innovations, particularly introduction of the new product. According to Schumpeter, the theory itself showing innovations theory, innovations. So they have to create new products. That is one side. And also introduction of new method for the production of the good. Opening of new market is required. And also the new sources of supply of raw materials. So new organization also required. So according to the Schumpeter, he asserts that the role of innovator not to be the capitalist, but to be entrepreneur, particularly desire to find private commercial kingdom. This will convey to prove this his superiority, the joy of creating, getting things done, supply of excess energy and ingenuity. When we talk about the Schumpeter's development, it is a spontaneous and dispontaneous change because the change in the channels of a circular flow, it is not in a sudden or it is not a spontaneous. Development is not a spontaneous. It required time. At the same time, the change in the channels of a circular flow. By new combination of in the new form of innovations with the help of bank credit or upward begins that creates the purchasing power. It creates increasing in the demand. It creates the price levels increases, demand increases, purchase power increases due to innovations with the help of the bank credit and upward begins. So there that leads to increase in the profit of the economy. So development process will take care and starts. Still, there is a criticism of this innovations theory of development. When we observe, when we look into this side, the innovations become the part of the functions of the giant stock company and no more required for an individual innovator as Schumpeter expected that. So which was the case of 18th, 19th centuries. As Knox said, pointed out that development is a continuous change, not in a discontinuous or spontaneous. So cyclical fluctuations are, due to psychological, natural, functional cases but Schumpeter attributes to the has given more importance to the innovations. So Schumpeter attributes entire development to innovations, but it may be also take place due to many social and economic changes. Schumpeter's theory purely applies under particularly underdeveloped countries, as they know, as we can identify, there is a lack of entrepreneur skills we can observe. They need institutional changes, not the innovations in the beginning stage. So these are the criticisms of the Schumpeter's innovations theory. Choice of techniques. So far, no, we discussed investment in sectors. In other words, we have seen, what to produce and what decisions made to investment to produce, certain goods and services. It is now a choice of techniques which is related to this. Thus, the choice of techniques, particularly the area of economics, which is more important, appropriate, particularly for capital or labor intensity method or production of goods, which we are going to know. But the production techniques, when we are talking about the relation between production and factors of production, which is called as production function, or the relation between production and factors of production, we call it as production function. Or technological relationship between production and output, we call it as production function. The proportion in which the factors in input, particularly the factors of production, which are combined in a production process, that is called as production technique or just a technique. Labor intensive technique, the process where larger portion of total cost due to labor as compared with the proportion of cost which is incurred by the purchase maintained in depreciation of capital equipment, that is called as labor intensive technique. Labor, when we are talking about the process, particularly large portion of the total cost, which is due to labor as compared to the proportion of purchase of maintenance and depreciation of capital equipment, which is called as labor intensive techniques. We can take, this is related to labor intensive. When we talk about the capital intensive techniques, requiring a large investment in capital goods, that is relatively small labor force, is called as capital intensive techniques. Whenever we are talking labor intensive techniques, labor are using more. Whenever we are talking about capital intensive, large amount of money or large investment in a capital goods, particularly relatively capital intensive techniques. So here, when we are talking about choice of techniques in developing countries, there are various reasons for labor intensive techniques in developing countries, because supply of labor is more than the demand for labor, because excess supply of labor is available in developing countries. That is the reason why supply of labor is more than the demand for labor. Hence, the less wages, less cost of production, that is more employment to the human resources, that is also, and more friendly, because labor of these countries particularly may not be handled high sophisticated technology. They are unable to use the advanced technology. That is the reason why labor intensive technique in developing countries. So reasons against the labor intensive techniques for developing countries. What we have to take initiatives, what we have to changes to be made, particularly for labor intensive techniques against labor incentive techniques. So labor incentive techniques which is suggested for the developing countries mostly because of the assumption that surplus labor force or disguised unemployment exists in developing countries. But in fact that the matter is there is no accurate data of surplus of labor. There is no accurate data on no disguised unemployment that is not available. So here, according to Schulz, transforming the traditional agriculture that leads to that reveals that India's during 1980s and 1990s and 20s fall in the labor force, which is followed in the fall in agriculture production. Hence, he concluded that there is no surplus labor in developing countries, according to Schulz. He reasons if the surplus of labor exists, the agriculture production would not have fallen when the labor force was, fallen during the said period. So, however, when we talk about particularly labor intensive techniques for the developing countries, for instance, we can conclude that the levies, as pointed out, that poor countries, particularly underdeveloped countries, they have less physical capital per head than the rich countries, and that most refers to the choose of less capital intensive techniques for production. So another topic we are going to discuss, that is characteristics and importance of infrastructure. What are the concepts of infrastructure? What is common infrastructure? What are the significance of infrastructure? Infrastructure and economic development, infrastructure and public good, we are going to discuss now. So infrastructure is a fundamental facilities and the system which is necessary for economy to functioning. There are no substitute for infrastructure development. There are no shortcuts for the faster economic growth or development. It is the only way, when we consider or when we undertaken the nations to develop, there are lessons for India and other Asian countries that because they are trying to grow, leapfrog into the elite club of development in the nations. Therefore, unless developing countries like India invest in all elements of infrastructure component, our development would be slow or lose out in the race of economic competitiveness. No nation, when we observe, without investing in infrastructure, are indeed, this is the reason why the Second World War, when we observe, Western countries are massive investment in infrastructure. Most of the Western countries are invested in infrastructure. It is also the reason why the Japan and South Korea, later China, they undertook the drastic improvement in infrastructure facilities so as to ensure that it is enables faster economic growth and development. The establishment of aspect, particularly infrastructure, that is supposed to facilitate and spur the economic growth by providing better connectivity and enhancing the productivity and efficiency. Infrastructure as composed by public and private physical improvements such as roads, railways, bridges, tunnel, water supply, no electricity bridges, the telecommunications, broadcasting, okay? All in general, when we observe the physical components of interrelated system, which is providing commodity, and services essential to enable the sustaining. So infrastructure that covers supporting services to help the growth directly, productive activities in agriculture and industrial sector. When we observe the services wide from the provision of health services, education facilities, particularly when we are applying to the power, irrigation, transportation, telecommunications. Infrastructure has two-way of relationship with economic development. Infrastructure is two-way of development with economic development. Particularly when we observe infrastructure provides economic growth and development. Economic development bring the change in infrastructure. So infrastructure has two-way of relationship. No, we call it as bidirectional relationship between infrastructure and growth and development. So infrastructure, when we talk about what are the important features of infrastructure? Infrastructure cannot made through the inputs, or infrastructure cannot made through the imports. This infrastructure helps to diversify the production by the farms, and also particularly this infrastructure raises productivity levels in the economy. This infrastructure brings down the cost of the enterprises. So here, with improving the infrastructure facilities, the firm can produce goods and according to the demand, the situation of the people different from the regions. So here, the infrastructure sector, particularly characteristics to help the distinguish from the other sectors of the economy. Most of the important distinguished feature is public goods. So most of the economic or physical infrastructure services, which are some elements of public, these services are available to the public. So what is infrastructure? Infrastructure means the basic facilities. Infrastructure means the basic services which facilitate in the different economic activities so that it help in economic development in the country. Education, health, transportation, communication, banking and insurance, irrigation and power, science and technology, which all are examples for the infrastructure. So these are called as social overhead capital and do not directly produce goods and services by inducing investment in infrastructure, industry, trade, and generating external economies automatically. For example, when we observe that an industry situated near or adjacent to the railway station or railway line, the national railways and highways that produce commodities as less cost. The railways line and national highways, these are the examples of economic infrastructure, and this will generate external economies with inducing investment facilities. So when we talk about the infrastructure, which was first introduced by W. Singer in 1950s, who identified the investment in infrastructure with investment in certain facilities provide and that regarded as necessary for the development. So according to the Hirschman, infrastructure consists basic facilities which primary and secondary, tertiary activities that can be functioning smoothly. Particularly these facilities play an important role for creating employment opportunities, investment opportunities to the other industries, automatically develop the other industries. So according to the Singer, Knox and Kindleberger, and they usually, infrastructure has the following characteristics. When we observe, according to them, pre-required for the development, the essential but not direct productive, these are not importability, technical indivisibility, external economies, and provision by the state. The common infrastructure facilities, when we observe safer and sustainable growth, therefore, infrastructure community, they are particularly in a regional or national or global level to deliver the sustainable infrastructure. There are several infrastructure are there, particularly a common infrastructure we can observe. The infrastructures are, as I said, different infrastructures are there. Education, health, transportation, energy, water, and safety resiliences, which all are, common infrastructures. When we are talking about the name of, education, institutions such as, primary and secondary and tertiary, or we can say that higher education that facilitate residential and student accommodation that leads to, develop the country. Health facilities. When we are talking about the institutions such as, hospitals that provides basic, medical facilities, the that leads to, such as, offices, training and facilities that leads the infrastructure facilities. Energy, the production and the delivery of energy that includes, electricity or electric grids. Most of the nations are moving towards the sustainable and non-conventional energy sources, so such as, solar and wind power. But when we talk about the underdeveloped countries or less developed countries, they are, still depending on the conventional energy sources like coal. Safety reliance, institutions and systems that allow a region to induce stress such as natural disaster, for example, tsunami shelter, earthquake detection system. These all are, sources of located, local food. Financial also. Financial markets, particularly and the services that transport or that support basic economic process, raising capital, investing, storing wealth, payment, and managing the risk that is related to the financial. Corrections and justice, courthouses for justice to the people, prisons to keep these culprits. This is all about the, common infrastructure facilities. When we talk about the types of infrastructure, particularly social infrastructure and physical infrastructure. Types of infrastructure, social infrastructure and physical infrastructure. When we talk about social infrastructure, health, education, housing, drinking, water and sewage. This is comes under the social infrastructure. Coming to the physical infrastructure, that can be, transport, energy, communication, irrigation comes under the physical infrastructure. So here, when we talk about the physical infrastructure means those basic facilities and services which are, directly benefit to the production and distribution of the economy, particularly this physical infrastructure. So the irrigation, power, transport, and communication, which all are the examples for economic infrastructure. The physical infrastructure is a basic, service, particularly foundation tool for the economy or the nation or the region or the city. Economic growth without human development, both physical and infrastructure, both physical and social infrastructure, which are more important for the growth of the economy. So the physical infrastructure accelerate the process of growth, whereas social infrastructure accelerate the process of human development. So both are important. So physical and social infrastructures are particularly in a complementary for each other, one depending on the other. Without one, there is no meaning of physical as well as social infrastructures are more important. So coming to the significance of infrastructure, when we observe the relationship between infrastructure and economic development is not in one-time affair. It is continuous process. It is progress, particularly in the infrastructure to develop in order to fulfill the self-accelerating the process of economic development. So there are various you know importance, particularly the significance of economic development. In this process, when we observe smooth functioning of the economy, smooth functioning of the economy. So infrastructure facilities are very important and very necessary for smooth functioning of the economy. They are like wheels of the development without which the economy will not be able to function properly. So this is more important. Smooth functioning of the economy is more important. Development of agriculture. The development of agriculture to be considerable in context of depends on the adequate expansion of development, particularly irrigation, credit facilities, transportation, power and marketing, training, along with that education also. So development of agriculture, which is more important. It also depends on the improvement in the research and development, such as facilities are providing particularly for the development of agriculture. At the same time, development and industry also very important. Industrial production that they require machinery, they require equipments, particularly the other crucial activities also more important, which is energy, skill, manpower, and management. Banking system also important. Insurance and transportation services are more important. So these activities, particularly facilitating directly that lead to the development process through the industrial sector and development of the economy. Promotion of investment. See, infrastructure development is pre-required, particularly for increasing economic development through the investment. The areas with sound infrastructure that may be succeed attracting more capital for investment. Moreover, larger the investment, particularly for development process, the industry and agriculture sectors, that opportunity for creation more employment. Whenever there is a promotion of investment in both agriculture sector and industrial sector, that leads to that creates the more employment opportunities through the promotion of investment. And also improvement in the productivity. Improvement in the productivity. When we develop the infrastructure, particularly transportation facilities, creating education, that leads to that increase the productivity. When we provide transportation facilities, when we provide education, that leads to increase the productivity. And also the development of the science and technology, and also the development of research and development, which are more important to improving the economic activities or economic productivity. Along with this improvement in productivity, employees generation also more important. Employees generation. See, infrastructure that is playing a vital role to creating the employment opportunities. So it is easy to improve the mobility, efficiency and productivity of the labor through the employment generating. Apart from this above, there are certain significance with reference to the primary infrastructure. Particularly, this infrastructure is related to the economic development. So secondary but essential significance of the infrastructure and the economic development. So when we observe that development of a backward regions, development of backward regions, the development of backward regions and the removal of regional imbalances yet another significant contribution and infrastructure facilities. The lack of infrastructure facilities particularly related to the backward regions. So if we that leads to imbalance the regionals. Further, when we observe the regional differentiation and unrest among the people of the region. So, particularly, there is a need to develop the backward regions apart from the investing in the developed regions. We have to concentrate, we have to develop, we have to do more investment in backward regions that leads to no equilibrium in the development or the imbalance become balance in the development process. Social changes also, infrastructure facilities, when we provide, instrument, particularly social changes, the development in industries, transport facilities, education, that changes the outlook of the people. Now, apart from this, even science and technology, when we observe the growth in the towns and that leads to changes in economic outlook, social changes also required. Growth of GDP. No, researchers, they found that there is a close relationship between spending on education, spending on infrastructure facilities and economic growth. There is a positive association between infrastructure and economic growth. So there are, various studies that reveal that 1% growth in the stock of infrastructure often associated with same proportion of growth of per capita of GDP. So the growth of infrastructure is directly proportionate to the growth of GDP. So this is more important. Overall, when we consider the infrastructural development that are mainly for economic development or economic growth, overall the development of the country. Infrastructure facilities which are very necessary for technological innovation, which are technological innovations that leads to economic infrastructure facilities, also important for eradicating of poverty and enhancing the globalization through the exports. So here the infrastructure is a heat topic for the economic analysis. It is more important in the role of development, not only the economy, but also civilization as well. So infrastructure is playing a vital role for uh, inducing the economic growth. So it is public utility services which give place and time utility to goods and services. The link of production, distribution, particularly that gives centers end to customers as well. Therefore, infrastructure facilities that brings together elements of the economic system. There are advantages when we develop the infrastructure facilities, particularly when we observe it helps with the development of market, particularly all the elements within the area. It facilitates large scale production for the purpose of smooth functioning of the economy, results the territorial division of labor, elements of regional imbalances. No, that ensures the price stability in the market through the infrastructure. It ensures that the mobility of labor and the capital. Overall, the growth, particularly in towns and cities, that results. It creates the places of time, utility. It plays an important role for development of agriculture and industry sector. So infrastructure and economic development, when we look into this point of view, the level of economic development in any country directly depending on the development of infrastructure. What does it mean? The growth or development is depending on the uh, infrastructure facilities or infrastructure. So infrastructure, it is, base for the economic development. As I said, infrastructure means roads, water system, mass transportation, basic airport utilization. So which all are supporting the services with the help the direct productive activities and agriculture, manufacture industry will automatically uh, increase. So therefore, insufficient availability of infrastructure results, what will happen, sub-optional or under the utilization of assets in the economy. Here's the infrastructure, which is more important for increasing the economic growth, particularly the road, railway transportation system, ports, power and airport, sufficient working making, all these, Indian economy within economies of the world. All these, are necessary for provision of reliable services and local business to grow and expand. The facilities, particularly activities, which services are help in increasing the overall productivity of the economy. So infrastructure, as I said, it is a two-way relationship between economic growth and infrastructure that promotes the economic growth and economic growth that changes